Hi, everybody. I'm Cam Davis, and I really appreciate the invitation from Tom and company to be part of the Great Lakes Lecture Series. After nearly 40 years of Great Lakes advocacy, it's just something I feel incredibly passionate about. And that passion isn't just for the lakes themselves, they're also for all of us who take time out of our lives to try to make our region's waterways better. Because after all, it doesn't matter what your age, what your gender, what your religion, or any other kind of identity, we all need water to survive and to thrive. I firmly believe that water is something that unites us and unifies us across this region. So I thought I would tell a few stories here about the Great Lakes and our place in the Great Lakes region. Let me start out with a map. And that map is of the watersheds around the Great Lakes, each individual watershed. My theme for today here is our place in Great Lakes history. A lot of times we think of history that's something in the past. We'll watch a show on the History Channel, or we'll read a book about a biography about something or someone from the past. We don't often have the chance to really step back and think about how we are actually at a very momentous time in history right now with the Great Lakes. My other theme here is the role of our communities, that our communities have, and us as part of those communities around the Great Lakes too. We tend to think of saving the Great Lakes as the job of a federal government, like Congress in Washington, D.C., or federal government in Ottawa, Canada. Or we tend to think about the states and their role in protecting the Great Lakes, not remembering that most of our state capitals are outside of the Great Lakes Basin. It's actually our communities within the Great Lakes Basin that have much more at stake in terms of bringing the Great Lakes back to health. And it's our communities and us, those of us who live within the Great Lakes watershed, that have the most important role to play. So with those two common themes under our belt, let's start with this. If you look at the impact that communities have on the Great Lakes, you can see just by looking at this watershed map where we're talking about. We're talking about Duluth, Minnesota. We're talking about Green Bay, Milwaukee, Chicago, Detroit. We're talking about Cleveland and Toledo, Buffalo, and Rochester, New York. These are all communities that are home to many of us, and they're also communities that have a tremendous impact on the Great Lakes as well. So with that, I'm going to go back in time a little bit, and then I'm going to come forward in time and talk a little bit about what we can do to help the Great Lakes, and then close out. If you really think about Great Lakes history, it starts with the glaciers carving places out, pits basically, and leaving sand behind that formed what are today the Great Lakes as we think about them. 10 to 13,000 years ago is when these glaciers retreated, and as they retreated, they scoured out the landscape, leaving behind what are the trappings of today's beaches. And we've got some of the best beaches in the world. Anywhere on the globe, we have them. So the Great Lakes were created really thousands of years ago, but more recently than that, the Great Lakes, because they host 20% of the fresh surface water on the planet, became a real draw for European settlement that moved in the 1800s. We're also blessed to have about 35 federally recognized tribes around the Great Lakes still today that do heroic work to help protect the Great Lakes as part of their own lifeways. So when we think about the 1800s and we think about settlement, we have to acknowledge the notion that we moved in as people of European descent, people of African American descent, Latin American descent, and many, many others. And in doing so, we sought the benefits that the Great Lakes created. Those benefits include, of course, first and foremost, a vast supply of cold, fresh water. That water is needed for so many things. We don't have time to go into them all, but they were needed for manufacturing. They were needed for fishing, for a food supply, and lots of other uses. What we don't often think about, we think about the water piece, the blue on your map. We don't think often about the green, the orange, the yellow, the brown, and the tan. And in those areas, we had some of the widest swaths of forests anywhere on the continent. Also, we have surrounding the Great Lakes in our watersheds some of the most fertile soil anywhere on the planet as well. And it's really the intersection of these three elements: forests, soil, and our plains, and then our waterways, that made the Great Lakes such an attraction in the 1800s. We worked our way, those are all the benefits, but in essentially extracting those resources for those benefits, we wound up creating a variety of impacts. Some of those impacts include overfishing. We also clear cut our forests in a lot of places, most places, decimating habitat, and also creating polluted runoff that choked our spawning beds in many of our rivers and streams. In clearing land for agricultural purposes, we did much of the same thing. We started to deplete groundwater supplies, created polluted runoff that impacts many of our rivers around the Great Lakes as far as fishing is concerned. We also created other kinds of pollution, air pollution, toxic pollution. We created combustible pollution, that is oil and grease and wood that floated on the surface of our rivers. And in many cases, because of that, our rivers caught on fire. Sparks from trains going over bridges would land on the surface of some of our rivers, not just the Cuyahoga in Cleveland. Chicago also had river fires as well, that essentially lit entire rivers on fire. Hard to imagine, but true. In a lot of instances, people would come out to watch fires burning on our rivers as if they were fireworks. We have since moved on from that. We don't have nearly the problem we have had with oil and grease and combustibles in our rivers, but that has since been replaced by things like PCBs, which are very temperature stable. They were used in electrical capacitors and hydraulic pumps. And now we have a new generation of toxic chemicals. They're often referred to as forever chemicals. PFAS is an acronym for this new generation of contaminants used in around the house, used to help reduce the potential for flammability within a house. So used in furniture, used in bedding, used in cosmetics, used in cookware, like Teflon coated cookware, used in many other things, especially firefighting foam. So over the past century to 2 centuries, we've seen how the benefits of the Great Lakes and what has attracted people, us, to the Great Lakes has overtaxed our ecosystem. And in overtaxing our ecosystem, we have, in the past several decades, and especially now, I'll get to that in a second, we have taken the fight back to the threats. So we are combating clear cutting. We are combating overfishing. We are combating toxic pollution, habitat loss, invasive species that have also come into the Great Lakes and still threaten to come into the Great Lakes. And that gets us to our next slide, which is our moment in history and what we can do. We have had, and I'm guessing 99% of you have participated in events like this, but just good old-fashioned volunteer events. Where I serve as a commissioner at the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, we have the second largest public property holdings anywhere in Cook County, second only to the Forest Preserve District. And what we do on these lands, which are adjacent to our waterways in the greater Chicago area, is we've had thousands of volunteer hours that have worked on taking out invasive species like buckthorn, planting new native trees, clearing trails for people with disabilities, and others that allow folks of all capacities to be able to move along our waterways, to appreciate them as much as possible. So these volunteer events, whether they're in Ohio, whether they're in New York or Wisconsin or Minnesota or in Illinois, wherever, are incredibly important for the health of the Great Lakes. But returning the Great Lakes to their majestic nature really demands even more than that. It demands smart policy. We have incredible laws on the books that have helped municipal water agencies like the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District cut pollution from urban centers by vast proportions. We used to see pollution as an afterthought or a result from doing laundry, doing dishes, because those detergents contained phosphates, create essentially conditions within the Great Lakes that mimicked the Great Lakes being fertilized and over-fertilized. Thanks to some of our policies like the Clean Water Act, we have been able to cut those discharges from municipal treatment plants and treatment agencies like MWRD enormously. And people are shopping smarter than they used to as well. When they go to the grocery store, we cut plastic. There's a lot of plastic waste that winds up in our rivers and our lakes. We also look for products that will reduce pollution on the back end of their use. We're cutting pharmaceuticals as well. A lot of times people would just flush pharmaceuticals down the toilet. We're not supposed to do that. They need to go to law enforcement or through other take-back programs via other agencies, so that those unused medications don't wind up in our waterways, don't wind up in our landfills. So there's a lot we can do personally. There's a lot we can do policy-wise. And now we're at the most exciting time, because we are at this momentous time in Great Lakes history where Congress has authorized and appropriated hundreds of millions of dollars, well over $3 billion at this point, through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and other programs that provide the resources for community groups, for universities, for agencies to all do their part to restore our landscapes and our waterscapes around the region. The fact is, we've got the people and the smarts, we have the policies, we have needed the funding then as kind of the last of the key needs to be able to bring the Great Lakes back to health. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that organizations like the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, US EPA, our state agencies, and many others are helping to move those resources out the door to get good work done on the ground and in the water. With that, I want to thank you for being in touch. I am always glad to help. here's how you can reach out to us. My amazing staff, Don Walker, Carl Camacho, Brendan Rauch, and we are here to help you. Even if you're not in the Chicago area, we'd still like to help connect the dots with you. So please be in touch. With that, thank you for listening, and thank you for organizing the conference and doing all you're doing to help protect our amazing waterways around the region.